Have you ever had a talk that changed something deep inside you? Something you didn't even know needed changing? I thought I was just helping a friend by watching her son. What I didn't expect was how he talked to me, like no one ever had before. His words weren't childish. They weren't thoughtless. They were on purpose, honest, and they touched a part of me that had been quiet for a long time. Let me know from which city you are watching us today. I'm so curious to see where you're all tuning in from. Now, let's start the story. I wasn't supposed to be anyone important that day. Just a friend doing another friend a favor. Clara called. That morning, her voice breathless with the usual chaos of being a working single mum. Her sitter had cancelled last minute, and she was due at the hospital for a double shift. I didn't hesitate. Of course, I'd watched Lucas. I'd done it before. Though not in a while. He was older now. 17, practically grown. The house was quiet when I arrived. Clara gave me a grateful hug at the door, tossed her stethoscope into her bag, and rushed out, leaving me alone in the soft hum of her living room. I expected silence, a movie maybe, or time spent in different rooms. I wasn't prepared for Lucas. He came down the stairs like a thought I hadn't finished, taller than I remembered, shoulders broader, still carrying that mop of dark curls that never obeyed a comb. He wore a navy t-shirt and joggers, one earbud dangling. His smile was lazy, almost teasing, like he'd been waiting to say something and was savoring the moment. "Hey, Nora," he said casually, flopping onto the couch. "Didn't think you'd be the one coming over." I smiled, trying to read his tone. "Well, your mom caught me in a moment of weakness." Lucas laughed. "She's good at that." I sat across from him, suddenly unsure what the dynamic would be. 17 is such a strange age, somewhere between boy and man, but not quite either. And I was just me, 62, twice divorced, tired in ways I didn't often admit. Still, there was something comforting about being needed, even just for a few hours. We made small talk at first. School, his upcoming college visits, the movie he'd half-watched last night. He was sharper than I remembered, thoughtful. When I asked what he wanted to study, he surprised me. "I'm thinking psychology," he said, turning toward me on the couch, one leg tucked under the other. "People fascinate me, especially the way they say things they don't mean and don't say what they really feel." I blinked. "That's surprisingly deep." He shrugged. "You ever notice that most adults answer questions like they're on stage? Like they're performing some version of themselves?" I felt the question land in my chest like a soft thud. I didn't answer right away. "I guess," I said carefully. "We all learn how to play our parts." Lucas tilted his head, watching me. "But don't you ever want to drop the act, even just for a little while?" His words didn't feel like a challenge. They felt like a hand reaching across a quiet room, not grabbing, just open. I shifted in my seat, caught off guard by how much his question unsettled me. I chuckled, trying to deflect. "You know, you were a lot easier to babysit when you still believed in dinosaurs living under your bed." He grinned. "Yeah, but I didn't make you think back then, did I?" That made me laugh, really laugh. I don't do that often anymore. And certainly not with 17-year-olds. The afternoon stretched gently between us. We talked more about books, about music, about how strange it is to grow older and not feel old on the inside. At one point, he said, "I think the hardest part of being young is realizing adults don't have it figured out either. They just get better at hiding it." There was something in his voice, a mix of clarity and softness that made me stop mid-sentence. He wasn't being glib. He was telling me he saw me, not as a babysitter, not as his mum's friend, just me. "You're very observant, Lucas," I said finally. He nodded, then added almost shyly, I think people miss a lot when they assume others aren't paying attention. I don't know what stirred in me then. Maybe it was the stillness of the room. Maybe it was the quiet cadence of his voice, calm but full of unspoken truths. Or maybe it was just that I hadn't really talked to someone in a long time without measuring my words. At some point, I moved to sit next to him, not close, just closer. The space between us filled with a kind of electricity that wasn't romantic, but wasn't neutral either. It was something else, a current of understanding, respect, and recognition. He turned toward me again, his voice low. You ever wish someone would just listen to what you don't say? My throat tightened because yes, I did. I had for years. And somehow this boy, no, this almost man had heard it. I didn't have an answer for him. But in that silence, in the quiet space between his question and my unspoken reply, I felt something shift. Not everything has to be said out loud to be real. That was the beginning. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that quiet understanding between two souls of different generations, would change something in me that I thought had been long forgotten. And Lucas, well, he would continue to surprise me in ways I never imagined. The next time Clara asked me to come over, I said yes before she finished the question. She was headed into another overnight shift, this time with even more apologies and offers to buy me lunch for a week. I waved her off. It's not a big deal, I told her. Really, but deep down, I knew I wasn't doing this just for her anymore. Lucas opened the door before I even knocked. You're early, he said with a smile that was less playful this time and more warm, like he was genuinely glad to see me. I stepped inside and kicked off my shoes. The house felt different. Or maybe I did. He had music playing softly in the background, something instrumental, jazzy, the kind of thing that fills a space without demanding attention. There was a tray on the coffee table with 2 mugs already waiting, steam curling up from the tops. You made tea? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He shrugged. Thought you might want something warm. It caught me off guard. Not just the gesture, but the way it was so natural for him. Most 17-year-olds wouldn't think of it, but Lucas wasn't most. We sat on the couch again like last time, but the air between us had changed, not heavier, not uncomfortable, just closer. As though the conversation we started before had been quietly waiting to resume. He asked me questions, real ones, not the kind you ask to be polite, but the kind that show you're actually listening. What were you like when you were my age? He asked. I chuckled. Oh, I was a mess. In love with the idea of love, always scribbling. In notebooks, dreaming about faraway places I'd never see. Why didn't you go? He asked softly. I looked down at my tea. Life gets loud, I said, and sometimes the dreams get drowned out. Lucas didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was gentle. That makes me sad. I glanced at him. Why? Because I think there's still so much of that girl in you, he said. The one who wanted more. My breath caught. There was no flirtation in his voice. No awkwardness or confusion, just honesty. A kind of raw perception that made me feel seen in a way I wasn't used to, not at my age, not after decades of being the background character in everyone else's story. We talked for hours about mistakes, regrets, hopes that never made it past the dreaming stage. Lucas didn't just listen. He absorbed. He reflected pieces of myself back to me that I didn't know were still intact. At one point he said, you know, most people underestimate how much wisdom comes from pain. I think you carry a lot of both. I smiled even though something stung behind my eyes. I've had my share. He leaned back, watching me for a beat. You wear it well. It wasn't the kind of compliment that made you blush. It was the kind that made you sit up a little straighter, breathe a little deeper. He had a way of speaking that didn't just fill the silence. It made it meaningful. Later, I stood to stretch, my back protesting like it always did after sitting too long. Lucas stood too, almost out of instinct. I waved him off with a laugh. "Don't go hurting yourself on my account," I teased. He grinned. "And just being polite." "Polite and thoughtful," I said. "You're making the rest of your generation look bad." He smirked. "Maybe I'm just an old soul." I tilted my head. "I think you're just paying attention." He nodded. "Most people don't, but you make it easy." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't awkward. If anything, it felt like both of us had said more in silence than we could with another hour of words. Eventually, I realized the time and reached for my coat. "Your mum will be home soon," I said. Lucas walked me to the door, his hand grazing the side of mine for just a second too long. Not in a way that crossed any line, just long enough to feel deliberate. "Thanks for coming again," he said. "I like talking to you." I turned to face him. Fully. "I like talking to you too." He held my gaze. "You don't talk like most adults. You don't pretend." "I think I forgot how to," I said softly. "With you, I don't feel like I have to." He opened the door slowly, the cold air brushing past us like a reminder the outside world still existed. But in that moment, I felt something stir. Not passion, not romance, but connection. A depth I hadn't expected to find again. Especially not like this. As I stepped outside, Lucas said one last thing that stayed with me long after I drove home. "I think people meet for a reason," he said. "And I think you came into my life to remind me how important it is to really see someone." And maybe, just maybe, he came into mine to remind me I wasn't invisible. Not yet, not at all. The following week, I told Clara I'd be happy to help anytime she needed. I said it casually, but I felt anything but casual. Something had changed or awakened in me after those long open conversations with Lucas. It wasn't attraction, not in the way people would assume. It was something more nuanced, something harder to define. A sense of being valued, of being heard in a way I hadn't experienced in years. A feeling that for once someone wasn't looking through me, but directly at me. It had been raining that evening. The kind of steady drizzle that made everything outside blur, just a little through the windows. When I arrived, Lucas was already in the kitchen, barefoot, sleeves pushed up, chopping vegetables. He looked up, with a grin, that now familiar calm in his eyes. "I figured we could make dinner tonight," he said. "Something real, something warm." I hesitated in the doorway. "You cook now?" He shrugged. "Learning. Thought you could teach me." I moved slowly to the counter, setting down my purse. "Well, I'm flattered." We cooked side by side, music playing low again, the warm glow of the under-cabinet lights casting soft shadows across the countertops. The rhythm of cooking, slicing, stirring, tasting made it easy to talk without forcing anything. Our conversation drifted naturally, looping from light memories to deeper reflections. We laughed about his failed attempt at a recipe the week before, and I shared how I once mistook salt for sugar when trying to impress a man I barely remember now. As the meal simmered, I leaned against the counter, watching Lucas as he moved around the kitchen. He had a calmness about him that was rare in people of any age, a kind of grounded presence. And he was curious, not in a nosy prying way, but in the kind of way that made you want to open up, to tell the truth without flinching. We sat down to eat, and somewhere between bites of pasta and soft clinks of silverware, he said something that made me stop. "Admit you know, You're the first adult I've talked to in a long time who doesn't treat me like a child. I swallowed and looked up. That's because you don't act like one. He smiled faintly. Most people still assume I'm just a kid who doesn't know anything. But you don't. You look at me like I matter. His words hit something tender in me, a place that had been untouched for too long. You do matter, I said, my voice soft. You're thoughtful. You're honest. That's rare. There was a pause, not an awkward one, but one filled with mutual understanding. He set down his fork and leaned slightly forward. And you, he said, you're more alive than anyone I've met in a long time. I felt my breath catch. Alive? He nodded. Most people your age, sorry. I don't mean that the wrong way, but most have kind of shut down. They go through the motions. They talk about weather or news, or their knees hurting. But you talk about dreams, regrets. You laugh like it still matters. You feel things. No one had ever said something like that to me before. Not even my ex-husbands. And especially not someone Lucas's age. I looked at him for a long moment, the corners of my mouth tugging upward. You make me feel like I haven't faded. Because you haven't, he said, his voice steady. You're just waiting for someone to notice. We didn't speak for a while after that. We didn't need to. There was a comfort in the quiet, a warmth that lingered between us. After we cleaned up, we moved to the living room. The rain was still tapping gently at the windows. The lights were dimmed and the soft flicker from the fireplace threw golden shadows across the walls. I sat on the couch and Lucas took the armchair beside me. His long legs stretched out, one hand resting behind his head. I think we're all just looking for connection, he said after a while. Real connection, no games, no masks. I nodded slowly. At some point, though, most people give up on finding it. He looked over at me, eyes soft. But not you. I didn't answer. Because maybe, just maybe, he was right. The next time I saw Lucas, something had shifted, not between us. Not in any way that made me uneasy, but within me. I had spent the week thinking, reflecting, feeling more than I had in a long time. His words had echoed through me in quiet moments. In the kitchen while I brewed tea. In the mirror as I brushed my hair. In the way I sat a little straighter when walking through town. I didn't feel younger, but I felt awake. Clara was running. Late again. She texted me with 3 frantic apologies and a Lucas will let you in message followed by a heart emoji. I smiled, pocketed my phone and knocked. When the door opened, Lucas looked different, not physically, but emotionally, like the week apart had ripened something in him too. I was hoping it would be you, he said softly. I'm practically your on-call sitter now, I joked, stepping inside. He closed the door behind me, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us wasn't tense, but charged, like both of us were holding thoughts we weren't sure we had permission to say out loud. Want some coffee? He asked. Only if you make it the way you did last time. He gave a small smile and led me to the kitchen. As the machine sputtered and hissed behind him, Lucas leaned against the counter and watched me. I could feel his gaze, but it wasn't the kind of attention that made me shrink. It made me feel honored, like something about me was still worth pausing for. I told someone about you, he said suddenly. I turned. Oh, my literature teacher, he explained. She asked who inspired my essay. It was about voices we ignore. People society lets fade into the background. I wrote about you. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't use your name, he added quickly. But I wrote about your laughter, the way you tell the truth without apologizing. How you made me feel like I wasn't just filling space. I swallowed hard, blinking against the heat behind my eyes. Lucas, I hope that's okay. I nodded slowly. It's more than okay. It's a gift. He handed me the mug and sat beside me at the table. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the kitchen tiles. For a moment, the whole house felt like it was holding its breath. Do you ever think, he began quietly, that some people come into our lives just to remind us we're not done yet? I met his eyes, I do now. He reached across the table, his hand resting gently over mine, not grasping, just being there, the way you rest your palm against a window and feel the sun on the other side. I don't want to say goodbye, he admitted. I smiled softly. You're not. He looked confused for a second until I explained. I mean, this connection, whatever it is, however long it lasts, it already gave us both something we didn't know we needed. That doesn't go away just because the days pass. Lucas nodded, eyes glistening slightly. You're the first person who's ever made me feel like I didn't have to prove anything to be worth knowing. I exhaled deeply. And you're the first person in a very long time who reminded me that I'm still worth being known. The moment hung there, full and bright. I knew we were at the edge of something, not romance, not fantasy, but a kind of emotional truth few people ever allow themselves to touch. We spent the evening talking like we always did, the hours slipping by unnoticed. When Clara returned home well past dark, she found us sitting on the floor of the living room, backs against the couch, sipping the last of our coffee. A stack of poetry books spread around us. You two look cozy, she said with a smirk. Lucas stood up first. We got philosophical again. Clara raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She trusted me and Lucas, and maybe she didn't fully understand what had been growing between us, that she didn't need to. When I said goodbye to Lucas that night, it felt different. Not final, but full. I think I'll always remember this chapter, he said as he walked me to the door. So will I replied. He looked at me, eyes searching. You changed me, and you reminded me of who I was before the world got too loud. We stood in silence, words finally running out, but meaning lingering between us, like the warmth of the fire we'd let burn low. Then he opened the door slowly, deliberately, and this time I knew exactly why he did. To let the moment settle, to give it the space it deserved. As I stepped outside, the cool night air brushed my skin. I turned one last time to look at him, and in his gaze I saw something that made my chest tighten. Respect, admiration, and gratitude, not just for the time we shared, but for the truth. We dared to speak in a world that often silences hearts that don't fit the mold. Driving home, I didn't feel like a woman of 62. I felt like a woman who had been seen. And sometimes that's all it takes to remember that we're still here. Still full of stories, still capable of connection, still worthy of being lit up from the inside.